We bring in now our regular guest, czar of all things Trump legal related, particularly January 6th. She is Julie Kelly. Julie, I hope you had a good New Year and a good Christmas as well. We appreciate you joining us. I said earlier on the show that I'm increasingly of the opinion that Jack Smith is not going to get his trial in Washington, D.C. related to Jan 6th before the election, because I think the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in on a variety of these charges. How would you assess the timeline? I think you have tweeted as well that there's no way the early March trial date is happening. Where are we now on these trials?
Hey, guys, thanks for having me on. Happy New Year. Happy Eve of Fedsurrection Day. If you're in Australia, it might already be Fedsurrection Day there. I'm not sure.
It is. It's January 6th already in Australia right now.
All right. Well, celebrate accordingly. Watch out for the FBI informants lurking around. I think it's a pretty safe bet that the March 4th trial date is off. I mean, here we are, 60 days out. There are a lot of deadlines that have been put on hold by the court because the immunity issue is now before the appellate court on Tuesday. That will make its way to the Supreme Court eventually. So it's a pretty safe bet the March 4th trial date is off. Does that mean that they will hold off before Election Day? I'm not so sure, possibly. But to your point, this immunity issue and Judge Chutkan denying Trump's claims of presidential immunity from this criminal prosecution definitely has to be settled by the Supreme Court because, of course, this is unprecedented. The Supreme Court has never weighed in on whether a president or former president is protected from criminal prosecution for activity that was conducted while he was president in office. So that could be. Now, how that fits in with the classified documents trial in Southern Florida, that's still up in the air too. That trial date, all of the pretrial schedule is on hold there as well, as what's happening in the D.C. case sort of makes its way through the court system. So it's very complex, very convoluted. But look, Jack Smith and the DOJ, as you know, they're not going to adhere to any norms or any rules or standard operating procedure in terms of not bringing a criminal prosecution before an election. We already know that they violate that brazenly. And so it's not like if this trial can move forward after a Supreme Court ruling in June that they put this on trial, that they put them on trial in July or August. Will they do it? Absolutely.
So, Julie, as these trials are maybe going to happen, we don't really know what's going on. Do you think Jack Smith has foreseen what's going on here, or is there a little bit of panic in the walls are closing in Democrat precincts, if you will, right? You know what I mean? The people that are like, oh, we finally got Trump. He's finally going to be convicted, and maybe we'll even be able to get him under home confinement or some kind of a sentence like that. Are they panicking a little bit that Jack Smith might have messed up? I mean, is this starting to trickle down, you think, or is this more or less what was expected by the special counsel?
No, I mean, I think the left and the Democrats have to be panicking about what's happening with this D.C. trial. It could be a matter of time before Jack Smith gets criticism from his own side, waiting until August 1st of last year to bring this 4-count sort of really flimsy indictment against Donald Trump for January 6th, lifting most of the verbiage from the January 6th Select Committee. But even at greater risk, we've talked about this, than the immunity issue, is that 2 of the 4 counts in Jack Smith's criminal indictment against Trump for January 6th could be reversed by the Supreme Court before they even handle the immunity issue. And that is this 1512C2 obstruction of an official proceeding statute. The Supreme Court granted cert in that matter last month. They will be reviewing how DOJ intentionally misinterpreted the vague language in that statute to use it against 300-plus J6ers and Donald Trump. If the Supreme Court comes back and rules that the district court has misapplied that statute, that it misinterpreted it, then that has huge consequences for Jack Smith's indictment. So then what does he do next? I am still not completely convinced, as we've talked about for over a year, he won't file a superseding indictment. simply because that 1512C2 charge is such in jeopardy. So I could sense some criticism heading Jack Smith's way. Also knowing that the immunity issue for President Trump had to be settled before the trial could move forward, that they waited until August to file this indictment. They pushed for a quick trial. Judge Chutkan granted that. This is a crisis of their own making, both Judge Chutkan and Jack Smith. So what happens now? Yes, I'm sure there's quite a bit of panic in the special counsel's office.
All right, let's talk about timing. You mentioned that March 4th initial trial date. I don't think that there's been any official acknowledgement. There's no way on the planet that's happening, right? So this case is not starting in March. So I think we can toss that out the window. If the Supreme Court waits until June, they can wait till late June, I think, on the calendar to release all of their different opinions. If they waited till then, which I don't think is crazy to contemplate. A lot of times they save their most politically charged opinions till the end of the term. If they do that, then how long has a jury selection typically taken in your experience on these Jan 6th cases? Because if they do that, I don't see any way that they can get this case resolved in D.C. before we go to start voting all over the country, especially given how early voting is. I mean, I don't know when the official earliest vote will be cast, but certainly it's in October. I don't see any way they could get this resolved before the election, but I'm just curious. You've been through so many of these trials. What's a typical jury selection process look like? This one would certainly not be typical, but I would think it would take a couple of months at minimum to seat a jury.
Well, it should take a few months, right? I mean, I think the longest jury selection process I saw was with the Proud Boys trial, and I think that was several days. But look, judges typically also just go run through this jury selection in a day or two. Jury questionnaires were supposed to be filed this Tuesday in this case as they send those out to prospective jurors. They look at who is qualified, disqualified. Then, as you know, they have the voir dire process where individuals come in personally. They're asked by the judge a number of questions, including, their ties to the federal government or DOJ or their inherent bias. So this is going to be, that would be a tough jury selection. But look, you've got Judge Chutkan at the end of the day. She really is the one who will seat this jury. Will she consent to a hastened process? Absolutely. Positively she will. So, Trump and his team certainly are not out of the woods in terms of quickening, rushing to a quick jury trial. Now look, there's also a slim chance that the Supreme Court won't hear any appellate court ruling. If the appellate court comes down after oral arguments are this Tuesday, the 9th, the appellate court 3-judge panel comes back, say a week or two later. They probably are already preparing this. It's 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. If it's a 3-0 decision, and then this eventually ends up at the Supreme Court, they could deny cert. They could just say, no, we're not going to review this. You need 4 justices to grant cert in a case, meaning they will review the appellate court's decision. Do you trust that we've got 4 strong justices on the Supreme Court who would take up such a politically charged matter in an election year? I don't. So that's certainly an option. And then the immunity issue is settled. He's denied immunity, and then the process can move forward. So that's another option, that this never even makes it to the Supreme Court because they're not required to take it up.
But they do have they do have half of these charges that they have to decide potentially as late as June, right? That they've already accepted.
Exactly. So that is a bigger risk to Jack Smith because that's a certainty. They granted cert on December 13th. Oral arguments will probably take place March and April. And then to your point, a decision rendered by the end of this term, which is the end of June. So there's a chance that they deny cert on the immunity issue and they, turn around on this 1512C2, which is pretty clear cut. That the DOJ has not applied that statute correctly. You had the appellate court judge, Florence Pan, a Democrat, say that this was the first time it's ever been used this way. The appellate court ruling that they're considering is basically 3 different opinions. It's called a splintered ruling which is what one of the judges on the panel said. If you read that ruling and you read the originating case, Fisher versus USA, it's hard to imagine the Supreme Court doesn't drastically reprimand the appellate court or revise that judgment, but overturn it outright. Then this 1512c2. And look, we already see, and I've reported, you guys have probably seen this. You have defendants who are awaiting sentencing going to judges who have allowed this count, asking them to delay sentencing until the Supreme Court can rule. So you already have judges in D.C. who are wary about what the Supreme Court is going to do with this count. That is a heavier burden on Jack Smith than this immunity issue, in my opinion.
Talking to Julie Kelly, Declassified with Julie Kelly is her Substack. You should all go check it out for these kinds of issues that we're talking about today. And Julie, the state ballot issues, Colorado, Maine, perhaps some others that may be coming up here. Do you view this as, I mean, I know you think that it's crazy. I think it's crazy. But is it really just frivolous political maneuvering, or is there any chance that this could actually work in one of these states?
I mean, it could work. It will, again, be up to the Supreme Court. You have Trump filed cert, and Republican officials had filed certiorari, which means they're asking the Supreme Court to review a case. And so they've asked for the Supreme Court to review the Colorado 4-3 decision that declared Trump indeed engaged in insurrection and therefore is disqualified from running for office. It's hard to see SCOTUS. I could see them denying the immunity issue before this one. But look, what does this do optics-wise? It continues to fuel the idea that January 6th was an insurrection, that Donald Trump was responsible. It also potentially gives Jack Smith the fodder he needs to file a superseding indictment along those lines, either insurrection, seditious conspiracy, as we've talked about over the past year. So, this all could be evidence he could bring before a grand jury in seeking harsher charges against Donald Trump. And keep in mind, we still have those 6 unindicted co-conspirators in the indictment, the existing Jack Smith indictment. Those are people like Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, people have taken pleas, people who have been charged in other venues. So, those are a few of the things that could be working in Jack Smith's favor right now. But look, this guy is not done. We've seen what he's capable. He's flagrantly violating a court order in the D.C. case by filing court-related motions or trial-related motions, which is why Donald Trump's legal team asked the judge to hold Jack Smith's team in contempt for violating this temporary stay on trial proceedings until there's a decision on the immunity matter. So he doesn't care. As I said, none of the rules, none of the laws, none of the regulations apply to Jack Smith. So this is where that sort of decision, Colorado and Maine, could help him out if he is seeking more criminal indictments against Trump.
Last question, Julie, quickly here. Biden is speaking in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, in about an hour, a day early to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Jan 6th. Do you think that speech is going to have resonance? Do you think Jan 6th still moves people?
I think it is such a sign of desperation. And for me and others who covered this, and thank you both for helping cover my work, it is a sign of desperation. They know the January 6th narrative is unraveling at so many levels. Public trust in what's happening. You see the Washington Post poll where support of the J6 insurrection storyline is disintegrating. And now you have the Biden campaign saying in some ways January 6th was worse than the Civil War, which is what his his campaign manager said in a call with the press this week. Well, at least during the Civil War, you didn't have insurrectionists storming the Capitol. That's what she actually said. It's a sign of desperation and should be a positive sign for the rest of us that the truth is coming out. The left, the Democrats, Biden, the media are on the run because this whole narrative is collapsing.
Thank you, Julie. By the way, as a Civil War history nerd, I can point out the reason there was no attack on the Capitol was because there were lots of forts that surrounded Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. And in fact, if they could have, the South would have taken Washington, D.C. and ended the war. That was the entire point. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah. I mean, the British burned it down in 1812 just to be mean. Just to be mean. They were prickly. It's like they had run out of tea and crumpets, and they wanted to just burn down our White House like the mean old Brits they are.
Hey, Richmond burned, and much of the South burned. Atlanta got burned down. If you could take a city, you tried.